those drop in, that'll be better for us. So welcome today. Today's presentation is cyber insurance to protect your business. My name is Andy Purcell. I'm a business consultant here at Total Computer Solutions. And just to give you a little bit of a background about us, we are a full service IT company servicing primarily Central North Carolina, defined as about a 100-mile radius out from the Triad. Certainly, we do some business beyond that radius, particularly in the remote areas via remote access. So as we go through this today, what I want to do is introduce to you Murphy Holderness. Murphy is from the Marsh McLennan Agency. He is an insurance consultant who has been working in the cybersecurity area for over 10 years now. And he began with CNA, obviously one of the largest carriers in the country, and doing a lot of cybersecurity work, in particular as an underwriter, and then moved 7 years ago to Marsh. And there he is working primarily with companies to guide them through the threats and the cybersecurity landscape. So we want to thank him for being with us today. Just a couple things. We are working with the Zoom platform today. So anything you have that you need to know about Zoom, you can certainly raise a hand and we can answer that for you. I think we're going to cover most of the questions today, but if you certainly have something, feel free to write it in the chat and we can address that toward the end. But hopefully we will cover that for you as we go through today's presentation. So with that said, Murphy, welcome, and we look forward to having you with us today.
Thank you for having us. Looking forward to it.
All right, we'll go ahead and jump right in. We're sort of moving from some general questions and then wrapping up with specific questions for businesses. And again, as I mentioned, given the group that we have with us today, if anybody has any questions, feel free to put those in the chat if there are things that we don't cover that you're interested in. First of all, let's just begin speaking about the big topic, the liability. What is my liability as a business owner if I fall subject to a ransomware attack?
Yeah, and from a 60,000-foot view, as a business owner, you are responsible for protecting your clients' and customers' data that's in your control, but if it's private information as well as anything else they give you. And so in the event of a breach or an incident, your organization is liable for any damages that causes to a potential customer or client, as well as the liability costs with setting up credit monitoring, certified mail notification. Each state has different requirements. And so your direct impact externally is going to be your liability if you're storing credit card data information, it gets out and someone is harmed because of that, or really the biggest cost associated with the claim, though, would be the credit monitoring, the notification costs, and those are your biggest liabilities, as that can quickly add up as you have to provide that for everybody impacted. And if you start looking at 100 to 10,000 individuals, that number can grow quickly.
Excellent. And just a quick unscheduled follow-up to that. Do I have any liability if one of my suppliers, customers, anybody of that nature is victim to something I've created? So an email originates from my company and affects them. Do I have additional liability in that case?
It can get complicated there. And so it depends on the controls and the contractual obligations in place. There's a coverage for social engineering, which will protect your organization in the event an employee falls for phishing emails and voluntarily parts with funds to someone is not who they thought it was. So, you thought Andy was requesting money from me, but really it was Tim, and I'm sending money to him. There's coverage in the policies to protect you from that exposure in the event money goes out. There's a subset of coverage that is something we recommend adding to your cyber policies called reverse social engineering, where basically it is protecting the client in the event services are given and the payment is sent elsewhere. It's kind of the backwards component of that, where you can provide protection for your customers, but at the end of the day, if they are voluntarily parting with funds and it's not coming to you, that's going to fall on your client or customer.
Excellent. You mentioned the phishing, so really have a question around that as well. If I do lose money as part of a phishing attack, or if I've got to pay a ransom in case of a ransomware attack, is that money that I'm able to recover either through legal means or through an insurance policy?
Yeah, and glad that came up. So we'll separate the two as phishing and ransomware are treated differently. Your cyber policies, we'll start with ransomware. Your cyber policies, 90% of them will include an extortion limit, and ransomware falls into that category. So in the event you come in, your systems are locked up, and someone's saying, pay me $1 million in Bitcoin, or we're going to delete everything you have, that would fall under an extortion event. And a cyber policy structured correctly should cover that incident, where the carrier will have their breach team get involved and respond directly to the threat and determine whether they're going to cooperate and pay the ransom to unlock the system, or whether they think it's not a legitimate threat and they'll revert back to backups. And so ideally, we want to put the controls in place up front to never have this incident occur. But in the event you do have a ransomware incident, yes, that is primary cause of a cyber policy. That's probably one of the areas we see the most activity in. And then coincidentally, the other area we see the most claim activity in would be on your phishing schemes and social engineering, where someone is thinking they're sending money on a legitimate invoice or an item of that. You know, a hacker gets in and changes a routing number in an email and then resends it from a different address. So, you know, invoice looks legitimate, but you send payment to the wrong party. The policies will also cover that. It is often a sub-limit in most cyber policies because it is such a prevalent and, you know, common occurrence. And the sub-limit, typically $100,000. Not to get too far down in the weeds, if you have that coverage on your current policy, we recommend double checking the dual authentication requirements. Some carriers will require that in order for that coverage to apply, you need to have verified the transaction via a different method of communication. So if you got an email, you're supposed to call to verify that it's legitimate before you send in order to trigger the coverage. There's been arguments over the past years that that's a little punitive, that, hey, if they verify, you're never going to have a claim. And so some carriers, and the majority of the ones we partner with, have removed that requirement, so the coverage applies regardless of incident. You don't have to have that dual authentication requirement.
Right,
so long-winded, but yes, there's coverage for both of those in a properly structured cyber policy.
I think it's worth the time. It's a big question to a lot of folks that we talk with on a daily basis. Just a quick follow-up there. You've mentioned a couple times about social engineering, and it's a big part of what we work with. Can you just give a quick definition or define for everyone how you view social engineering?
Yeah, the easiest way that I look at social engineering is basically getting tricked or duped via internet or email or through your IT system. So something I perceive to be true, I think I'm emailing Andy, and it is somebody else who's tricking me into voluntarily parting with funds. That's the big term there, is I willingly hit send and hit the money and took it out instead of someone reaching in and grabbing it out. And so by voluntarily parting, it falls into that social engineering category.
Excellent. And I think from our IT generalist perspective, our slightly broader definition would also include folks getting you to perform some sort of espionage within a company, giving away company secrets, company data, also potentially even being talked into taking a USB drive and plugging it into the system to allow somebody access. So there's some physical as well as the digital impacts there also. All right, so
and that's correct. That's a great point.
Now that we know what all of that is, what can we do to prevent an attack?
Yeah, and so we put the cyber policies in place, you know, similar to an auto liability policy. You know, we hope we never get in a car accident and have to use our auto insurance, but we're protected in the event that, you know, we do get in a car crash. Same mindset should be applied to cyber insurance. So we want the insurance policy in place to protect us in the event something does go wrong, but we hope that we never have to use it. And to prevent the policy from being used, there are certain things you can do up front to protect yourselves. First and foremost is being aware that the threats exist and that no organization is immune to it. Just employee knowledge and being aware that cyber threats are out there and they're targeting every company and organization from a small church all the way up to a billion-dollar manufacturer. And so employee awareness is key in our minds. You could have the best IT procedures in the world, but if you've got an employee who is not aware that these threats exist, just careless with your assets or invoices, the protocols you put in place up front aren't going to help. What we do recommend doing is an IT review of your systems and protocols, making sure you have firewalls in place, multi-factor authentication. So that means if someone logs in on the computer, they need to get a text message code or a Google Authenticator code to log in to verify it's them. There are levels and levels of controls, as well as random employee testing internally. Send out tests to keep them alert, internal fake emails to see if they click on it and use it as a learning experience if they do click. It's an ever-evolving world in the cyber landscape, and so that's where we recommend partnering with your risk manager or a TCS to have someone come in and do an analysis and a review and help make sure that you have all the protocols in place up front to prevent you from ever having to call us to file a claim on your insurance policy. I would really harp on employee awareness, though.
Excellent. And I know just another point that might be interesting to a lot of folks is you've mentioned liability a few times, and that's the key, as it was our lead question today. What's the evolution as far as that liability? I know the requirements have changed recently in the last year or so, and how has the liability, not only definitions but also how it's being applied, changed in the last year in your industry?
Yeah, it varies a lot based on what industry you're in. So healthcare versus manufacturing, the regulation that'll be coming down from the top. And then on top of that, it varies based on state, what state you're operating in, how much data you're collecting on your customers, et cetera. California is implementing different rules and regulations than North Carolina. And so the regulation can vary a lot. Our recommendation, and we present it to every client we work with, is you need a cyber policy in place. It is a core essential function to keeping your business alive or organization alive, similar to your general liability insurance. And it's just the way that the world has evolved the past 20 years, where, it used to be an ancillary coverage that, maybe you'd consider if you were doing a lot of online business. Well, with the world we're working and operating in today, it's paramount that everybody has it, regardless of the regulation. The most heavily regulated and scrutinized organizations are going to be those in healthcare with, patient data or patient records on file and items like that. But it does vary based on what industry you're in.
Are you finding that it's becoming more difficult and more expensive to qualify for coverage these days?
Yeah, and so this, again, it depends on the industry you're in, but as a whole, the cyber market is getting much more expensive, and the underwriters are getting much more selective in who they provide the coverage to. To put this in perspective, the majority of your cyber policies have been nominal in cost over the past couple of years, where they're $5,000, $10,000 policies, and they're getting hit with these $1 million Bitcoin ransoms or $100,000 social engineering losses. And part of that is that the policies typically, we see $1 million minimum limit. And so if I'm a hacker, I'm going to go after, it doesn't matter to me the size of your organization. I'm going to send out thousands of emails and see if I can hit on 5% of them and, quickly generate money. And so there's been a broad amount of claim activity where the carriers simply put, they're charging $7,000, $5,000 a policy, whatever it may be, they're not making enough to cover the current ransomware and extortion losses that are happening in the market. And so we're seeing, not specific to any one carrier, we're seeing a significant increase as a whole. And then part two of that is we're seeing carriers draw a line in the sand where they're saying, if you don't have multi-factor authentication, we're no longer going to give you a quote. We don't care if you've been a client for 10 years. If it's not in place going forward, we're not going to give a quote, because 80% of our claims occur from organizations that don't have multi-factor authentication. So we're seeing a lot more stringent underwriting requirements, which you would think in a typical insurance market would lead to decreased pricing. But we're seeing not only increased underwriting scrutiny, but we're seeing increased pricing as well. And there doesn't appear to be relief for that on the horizon. As the claim activity continues to escalate, you see something in the news almost every other month with SolarWinds hacks or Russia or another. There's something every week, and as we move towards a more digital economy, it is going to continue to go up in price.
All right, excellent, thank you. As we move into a couple of questions about the very personal, how does an employer teach their workers or their staff to avoid? How do they train them to not fall for these kind of scams?
As I alluded to earlier, employee awareness is huge, and so
Murphy's locked
not
himself
just.
up. There we go, Murphy. You could start again.
Can you hear me?
For just a minute, if you want to maybe just start that answer again.
No, yeah. As I alluded to earlier, and can you hear me now?
Yeah, we're good.
Employee awareness is by far the most critical thing. And so making sure they're aware that these threats exist and that your organization is not immune to it. And then part two is testing it, random testing. There's a number of organizations that will send internal phishing emails to see if they can get employees to click on it. I know I've been guilty. I've clicked on one before, and I'm even in the cyber world. So they look legitimate, and it just makes you more and more aware of how quick things can escalate. One simple email that, I think is coming from my manager, and I click on it and quickly notice that, I've been hacked. It's anything that looks off or that's out of the norm, training them to kind of second guess it before opening it. Does Jay usually email me at 7 at night? Maybe something's a little off there. And so employee awareness is critical.
Excellent. I know that's a lot of what we preach as well, and we have used some of those systems for the training, and then also sending out the messages. And it's difficult, but it's a great way to learn and really become familiar with what to look for. Procedurally, if a company is hit with an attack, whether it be ransomware in particular, or whether it be phishing of some sort, what steps should they take? What are their processes from the first minute moving forward?
Yeah, the first thing we always recommend when we put a cyber policy in place is write down the name and number of your insurance agent and carrier. When you get hacked, you come in, your system's locked up, you sit there and you go, okay, I'm going to call Murphy. Well, Murphy's information's all in your system. So you'd be surprised how many times that occurs. First call would be to call your insurance carrier. They have dedicated breach teams for the most part that will guide you, handhold it through, analyze the situation. From there, there's a couple other calls that we recommend making. One to your IT providers, two, depending on the nature of the threat, the FBI, for cyber extortion claims. And this is getting really down in the weeds, but because of September 11th and the loss that came of it, you have to know who you're sending money to. So the carriers have to vet with the FBI that the hackers are not on the known terrorist watch list in order to verify if they can even make payment, because if they're a known terrorist, they can't send the money. So it's a combination of your cyber carrier they'll analyze if it's a breach or not. They are financially invested in helping determine the cause and situation and limiting the risk, but then also your local authorities and your IT. Before we move off that, and time is of the absolute essence on those, especially even with social engineering. If you send money, it can be stopped if it's caught quick enough in the first 24 hours or so. And so there's no shame in raising your hand and saying, hey, I think we've got an incident. Worst case scenario, it turns out to be nothing. But I would certainly harp on time being critical in these and getting your carrier and partners involved as soon as possible.
Is there a limit in the policy as to how much time you have to report it before you're jeopardizing the policy itself?
That depends based on the carrier you're with and the terms and conditions. Typically they need to be reported in the policy year, especially if it's on a claims-made policy. If it's occurrence-based, you've got some more flexibility. There's certainly not a week timeline. For the most part, you just can't come back 3 years later, but that would depend on your specific policy terms.
Right, and I know the ransomware is pretty much immediate. If your system is encrypted, you're going to need to get touch somebody immediately. Whereas a phishing scam could in fact launch something into a network that does not present itself until 6 months down the road. So at that point,
and that's a different situation too. If you don't become aware of it, it's the reporting requirements in most insurance policies have to do when you become aware of the claim.
Okay, nope, that's excellent. As far as the future within your industry, I know right now you said that many companies require it. Do you see this growing into something that is a requirement for all businesses in order to operate, or where do you see that going?
Twofold. One, I see it becoming just an operational exposure where you're going to have it in place to protect your organization to stay in business. And because it is so business critical, we envision, or I envision, I don't want to speak for my colleagues, that the federal government will probably mandate it be required at some point. We went from 5 years ago where only a handful of our clients had policies to now I can only think of one or two of my clients off the top of my head that opt not to take a cyber policy. And it is not for a lack of information. So I do think every business will have it.
Excellent. So with just the reasons you've mentioned so far, you would be very clear to say this is essential for all businesses to have.
Yeah, there are very few risks when you look at your business where at any given moment you could incur a $50,000 to $1 million loss in the next hour. I mean, it's a real exposure hanging out there, and so to protect your business on it, I think almost every organization, if they don't already, will have a cyber policy in the near future.
All right. As far as all of that is a good protection for all these companies, certainly we've talked about the front end, we've talked about doing the back end after something happens. Is there anything else, whether it's cyber insurance related, whether it is related to the technological part of things? Is there anything else that you recommend customers do, or that even your potential customers do to try to prevent this from happening?
Yeah, there's obviously there's a lot of, cyber's scary. The unknown's alarming. Just given the nature of it and the uncertainty of when a breach might happen, it's not a hurricane that you see coming. And so we certainly recommend spending the investment up front on putting up proper firewalls, making sure your systems are up to date, that you don't have open ports. And trust me, I am not an IT guy, and so the fact that I know what a port is mind-boggling enough. But that's where you need to rely on either your internal IT partners or a third-party vendor to come in and do a risk assessment for you, because preventing it up front will save you massive amount of headache trying to recreate what you had, but also help keep your costs down in the future and protect operating functions. The other item we didn't touch on that I wanted to quickly throw in there is that in addition to taking care of your clients, customers, your liabilities that are associated with a breach or an incident, cyber policies, the majority of them will include a business income provision, where in the event your website was down or you were hacked and your systems are down and you can't operate, the policy will step in and replace the lost revenue from when you were down. And so, again, these policies are very broad in the grand scheme of things. It's structured correctly, where they can help prevent your worst case scenario, where ideally you don't miss a beat and you're able to get back up and running. I can't emphasize enough, and I think the cyber carriers will continue to harp on this, that you've got to start putting those controls in place. And where in the past we would be able to get you a quote if you didn't have multi-factor authentication, the way the market's going today, 95% of our carriers probably will decline you instantly if you don't have multi-factor authentication. I know one of our largest carriers, Travelers, just implemented that this past month, where by X date, if you didn't have that in place, then they're probably not giving you a quote.
All right, excellent. And that does bring up to my mind a sort of a follow-up question. Do policies typically cover hardware replacements, whether it's PCs, servers, whether it is drives? If there's damage to one of those as part of a breach, how does that factor in?
Yeah, there's a condition in most policies for betterments and improvements after a breach. So if you improve your system after it, the carrier might not pay for 100% of it, but they will likely pay a portion of it depending on your policy terms, where instead of, if we have to replace hardware, instead of replacing it with the 2010 server that broke, they'll help cover the cost of upgrading that server as part of the replacement. And so policy specific, it's likely not going to be covered at 100%, but they will help foot the bill because they want to see you improve and become protected as well.
Right, so some sort of a proration based upon the depreciation of the current value of the server.
That's correct, yeah.
All right. And I think you had also mentioned the importance of backups or disaster recovery, because in most companies' cases, this is the most real disaster they're going to have. I mean, the chances of hurricanes and things are there, but I think right now ransomware is much more prevalent than any of those are. So you had also mentioned the need for backups.
Yeah, backups are highly, highly recommended, and not just one of them. And we have some clients and insureds that go to stream and back it up in 4 different places. But then also partnering with a IT or tech company to make sure that you're doing the proper backups, so that you're not just copying a virus or ransomware into your backups as well. So making sure there's separation. Again, that's a little bit further down where I trust our partners to guide you on that. But proper backups can avoid a claim. If you're confident enough in your backups and you're able to scan through them and make sure the ransomware is not in there, then you can avoid having to pay out the claim potentially by reverting to a backup.
Excellent. And just from our side, we do recommend not only an on-site backup, but then also a copy of that stored in the cloud, possibly a couple of cloud locations, just to ensure that you do have that local backup if you need to pick up an email or a deleted file. But even if that were to get affected by a breach of some sort, you would then have the cloud version you could return to. So that's sort of our perspective on things. And I do have one more follow-up, actually, the third question that's come in from the group. When we talk about the MFA or the multi-factor authentication, is that for all users that are required, or is it just privileged users or admins? What's that look like?
Carriers are going for all users now. And again, CEO versus assistant may look different on paper, but they both have access to the system. And so really the best practice is every employee should have MFA in place. And I know that is a change from what the industry has done in the past. We all know it's been a best practice, but it might not have been required. And so you are not alone if your organization is going, oh crap, we don't have it, what do we do? And so there are resources out there to help implement it, but given how IT keeps developing, it should be in place for the entire organization.
And that is also something that we definitely recommend. And I think multi-factor authentication can be something that you get through a number of vendors or suppliers that are out there, all the way into very, very intricate or detailed examples, companies like RSA or Duo. But then there are also other ones from Microsoft and from Google. They're very simple. They're mostly run on the phone and do not have a large cost to that. I've got one question that's more technical in nature, and let's see if it's something that you've run across in policies or if it's still not quite made its way. When you talk about MFA, does it affect service account? That is, email accounts that go to groups rather than people. They go to info at Marsh McLennan, info at TCS. Are those included, or is it just individual user accounts?
Each situation would need to be reviewed, but my personal take would be that you're probably all right. From a risk management perspective, I'm going to tell you to do it on everything, but Given if it's just a forwarding email address or something along those lines that doesn't have a lot of system access, I would say you're probably okay. Again, I would want to learn more about the specifics of your situation though.
I appreciate it. I think that takes care of the 4 additional questions that we had now that came in from our users. If you could maybe give a couple minutes on what Marsh McLennan does as a company and sort of what you could provide if we had somebody who's watching today or that's within our client base who needs these kind of services. Just tell us what you could do.
Yeah, happy to. And thank you again to Andy and TCS. We love doing these little town halls and sharing our insight. And so at the end of the day, we can certainly help you if you'd like help, but happy to provide this guidance for you to go back to your own insurance agent as well. Marsh McLennan Agency, we are a full service risk management insurance agency. And so we can help with all components of your cyber replacement as well as your other lines of coverage. The key takeaways that I would give is ask the question of your insurance, current insurance policies. If you are not aware of where you stand with cyber, I would review it and really look to make sure that you have the key coverages in there, which are social engineering and the extortion. I would think social engineering is often a sublimit that if you just got to throw in cyber policy on top of your business owner policy or something of that sort, it's not always included. And so you'll want to ask the question to make sure it's there. If you do need guidance or want assistance in reviewing your policies, we're happy to do a review and happy to help secure that coverage for you. But again, the way it's going, it is something that should be on the forefront of either your mind or your risk manager's mind for your organization.
Outstanding, Murphy. I'd like to thank you for being with us today. And I think it's the 3rd or 4th one of these we've done together. So always appreciate you lending your time. From the TCS perspective, we certainly thank everybody for being here and some of the things that Murphy mentioned that we might be able to help with. Also, we do provide network assessments that include looking at the hardware, its age, its viability. It includes looking at firewalls. It includes the wireless network as well as the physical. And it includes some recommendations we can make that will help you not only with your insurance needs, but with your compliance needs and qualifications. I'll also put a plug in. We're firm believers in the email training, the phishing training process. We could certainly do that, certainly consult with you on how to put that in place. And then we have recommendations for multi-factor based upon what we've seen and what users have had success with. And we can sort of make them work along with the insurance requirements to ensure that you are doing everything you can do, both to protect your business and to make sure that you're qualifying to the insurance guidelines as they evolve and change. So thank you everyone who attended in person. We'll also get this sent out to those of you who wish to view later. So those of you viewing it down the line, thank you for joining us as well. And I hope everyone has a great and safe day in the cyber world.
Thanks, Andy.